Oh my gosh, we're towards the end of the semester already, if you can believe it. Today, we're going to be talking about our diversity interview essay. To do that, I'm just going to go over things like when it is due, um, our overview of it, the purpose of it, the content, the requirements, and the organization. So, to have the ability to communicate over multiple cultures is increasingly necessary in our multicultural world. Whether or not it's because you're working with people halfway around the world, or because halfway around the world people have moved to this area, especially the Bay Area, bringing in all that culture and all that different language that we use. Achieving communication competence is necessary for personal and professional success. One of the ways that we can help to ensure that we have communication success and communication competence is to talk with people from different cultures. And so this assignment is going to give you the opportunity to learn about communication and culture by interviewing somebody from a different culture. So, what exactly is culture? Well, culture is an environment in which languages develop and influences how languages are used and interpreted. A lot of times we tend to think of culture as somebody from a different country, right? Or somebody from a different race. But really, what it comes down to a lot of times is culture is where language has changed to meet the environment. A great example of this might be something like military culture. Absolutely, whether or not you're in Korea or in Russia or Ukraine or even the United States, the military has their own language in order to communicate. And we do have our own culture. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's talk about the purpose. The purpose is to explore and understand how culture influences communication and relationships, and to be able to better improve your ability to communicate competently in cross cultural interactions. So, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to interview somebody from a different cultural group. Now, I don't want two people to do the same interview of the same person. That's going to be boring for me to read, and I don't particularly like to be bored. So, what I really want you to do is really kind of reach out there and figure out different people that you can interview. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do a classmate, but I'd avoid a friend strictly because that's somebody you already know and you already have a lot of preconceived judgments on them. Um, I will also say this: the more different they are from you, the easier this will be to write. If you are um, in a community college and you interview somebody from a 4 year university, you are going to find that there's different college cultures. However, you're going to have to dig really deep to get to them. A lot of it may be very similar. On the other hand, if you are, you know, a heterosexual white male and you interview a transgender Black woman, that might get you a lot of information that's going to be really easy for you to dissect. So it's going to be three parts of this. Um, excuse me, there's going to be three parts of this. Number one is an assignment that's going to be due on Friday 18th. I may be wrong on the date. Double check that. And it's, all you have to do is tell me who you're going to interview and how you're going to interview them in person, on Zoom, on Teams, however it is. And it's going to be worth 10 points extra credit. And then on that following Monday, there's going to be a second assignment due, and it's going to be I want you to write and publish at least 10 open ended questions you'll ask. So, what is an open ended question? Well, it's a question that can't be answered with just yes or no. It has to encourage detailed, elaborate responses. Make them dig deep because it's going to help you. And then the essay is going to be due the Wednesday of July 23rd. So, this class has moved so quick, isn't it? So, what do I want you to think about for this essay? I want you to talk with your interview partner about the communication in their cultures. Think about how similar or different it is from your own. Analyze how your own cultural communication practices compare with those for your interview partners. You know, one of the things my last class kind of dived into is different ways that people communicated about food and over food and how families came together for food. So you might even think of it like that. Like, what kind of events? Maybe it's birthdays, maybe it's graduations, or how they express that they want you to go to school, or how they communicate to you what they expect you to do with the rest of your lives. Some very interesting stuff out there, specifically about job orientation and how we are kind of trained by our parents to take over their jobs. But so the instructions, you're going to request an interview with somebody of a culturally diverse group. Prior to the interview, I want you to research cultural differences to prepare for the questions because I don't want you going in there blind, hence the extra credit assignment. Okay. I want you to be prepared to ask those questions. You're going to explain when you're requesting that interview, you're going to explain your assignment. And I would set aside an hour for the interview because usually there's a little bit of banter in between, but try to shoot for a 30-minute interview. Okay. Really respect your audience's time. That's so important to do. Okay. So again, you have this interview set up now, and I want you to research that culture. What can you find out about it? What kind of peer-reviewed journal articles are there? I really want you to not be naive walking into it. And it's true that the culture as your person celebrates it or observes it may be different than what the literature has said, and that's absolutely fine. But I bet they're familiar with what some of the literature has said, even if it's not from academic sources, and they'll have a lot of thoughts on that, right? Um, you may be able to dispel incorrect information based on this interview, right? I'm always interested that English classes sometimes will teach you how do you do as a opening, but have you ever said that as an English speaker ever in your life? Yeah, me neither. So I want you to also review some of the areas of interpersonal communication that's going to kind of help you really shape your questions. So some of the things that we've talked about in this class are things like self-concept, perceptions, right? Verbal and nonverbal communication. When I lived in Italy, when somebody was telling you to come here, they do this, or maybe that was by, I can't remember. It's been like 20 years now. But think about how that nonverbal can create communication misinterpretations, right? I had a really good friend. First time he ever came over to my house, he took off his shoes, and I looked at him and was like, "You think you're sticking around or what?" Right? But that was part of his cultural upbringing, is to take off his shoes. And one time we both went to one of his friends' house. He took off his shoes. I took off mine. Nobody else did. It was a little embarrassing, but that's the kind of thing that we learn with kind of observing and asking questions about nonverbal communication. Think about gender roles, right? Think about gendered communities. Are there specific roles that the women or the men take charge of in a family? Think about communications in that family, the expressions of emotions, conflict management, friendship communication, romantic relationships, how are those explored? You know, Western civilization, we often look at passion, there's a lot of dating, but not all cultures are the same. And then relationships affected by business, power and influence, such as business, school, political relationships. When you're done with your interview, make sure that you thank your interviewee for their time. Ask your questions and take notes. You can ask to record either on Zoom, because that has an automatic record function, um, or uh, or like an audio recording on your iPhone. But make sure that you ask permission to do so. And in fact, I would ask permission. If they say yes, I would start recording and ask permission again, or state permission. As you know, I'm recording. You said this is okay. That way, just you cover your bases, right? At the completion of the interview, make sure you thank them for their time, and you might even follow up with a quick follow-up email. I know that those can sometimes be a little difficult to write, but I really want you to do it from your heart. No AI, God bless you. Just say, hey, I want to thank you so much for helping me with this assignment and me moving on with my schoolwork. And thank you so much for your time. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Okay, so let's get into writing the essay. I want it typed, obviously. I want it Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, and it's going to be turned in on Canvas, okay? I want it Times New Roman, 12-point font. My eyes are kind of starting to go at this point in my life. I really like it to be a good font that I could read. 3 to 5 pages, okay? Minimum is 3 full pages, okay? That doesn't mean like 2.5 pages. That means 3 pages, all right? I really want you to dig deep with this, okay? At least 2 references, APA in-text citations. I like that. Have quotes in there. I love that, okay? I want that APA format. If you have questions on that, I do have videos I already have recorded that I can post for y'all, but I know a lot of you all probably already know how to do that, so I don't want to overload you with lectures. No cover page is necessary, but a reference page is necessary, okay? The writing the essay, write it as a narrative. Okay, I want direct quotes from you and the person, but also paraphrased information. That shouldn't be all quotes. Compare and contrast your own communication styles, your own culture's communication styles with your interviewees, right? Address the importance of understanding these cultural differences and how they can affect, right? Maybe think a little bit about like, wow, if I did this in my house, this might be the reaction. And you can always ask them the same question. You know, if I did, took off my shoes walking to your house, what might that be your family's reaction, right? That might be fun to really think about and explore. All right, organization, the introduction. I want a brief description of the interview. You might say where you did it, when you did it, your interview partner, who they are, the interpersonal topics that were focused on in the paper, and the brief preview of the body of the paper. Okay, that's kind of your thesis, right? The body should, of course, be the longest part of the paper. I want you to explicitly address communication styles using what we've learned in this class. Think about how much we talked about nonverbal and just in one of our last discussions that we did, and how much we were able to kind of look about how body language can not always be a truthful recognition of how people act, right? Think about the cultural differences and similarities with your own, right? And think about how those differences can affect relationships. Again, having somebody walk into my house, take off their shoes like they're staying there for a while was a little bit of a, what are you doing, right? So think about how that can affect this. This is what it absolutely must have. Direct quotes from your interview partner, quotes or citation from the textbook, articles, high quality newspapers or magazines. One of the places I actually find great stuff for intercultural is actually a lot of travel magazines. You might look there. Your conclusion, I want a brief summary of the paper, but I also want to hear about your impressions and observations of the interview. How did you do interviewing? Right? Is this like suddenly your new job? Are you going to start being like a wonderful interviewer? Or you learned that maybe if you weren't as prepared as you needed to be? I really want you to dig deep on that. And what you learned about culture and communication. So, as I said, there's a lot of different cultures out there. And I'm really open to how you want to describe this. Okay. So, I mean, there is like that kind of that world cultures, right? Chinese American or Korean or Filipino or African American, Italian. But I really want you to think about some things outside of that as well, like LGBTQ culture, prison culture. I had a wonderful student write a very interesting paper on prison culture once. Look, I have prison twice. A military veteran. Like I said, you've got your own language. And a lot of us do. I would argue that gamer is a culture. I would argue that probably even gardening is a culture. But again, the more different from you this person is, this culture is, the easier it's going to be to write. I had a student ask me once if she could do fraternity culture. And I said, it may be a really tough paper to write, but you do you. I would look up the research and see if there's some research on it about culture, but I don't want to tell you no. And I probably won't tell you no, but if you have questions on an appropriate culture, feel free to reach out. So again, it's going to be due on the 23rd. Talked about the overview of it, the purpose of it, content, the requirements, and the organization. Have some real fun with this. Those questions that you write beforehand are really going to set you up for success. So make sure you use the opportunity, okay? And you know what? I don't want you to use ChatGPT or AI for that because I never want you to use it. But if you want to work together in groups, or I could always open a discussion for you all to kind of work through some questions together. That I'm okay with. All right. Crowd surfing is one thing, having the computer do it for you is another. All right. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I'm so excited to read that essay, and that will be our final assignment of the semester. And you'll know you have made it. Talk to you soon.